Welcome back. I'm Anonymous, and this is Conspiracy Anonymous. Imagine a killer who didn't fit any pattern humans are used to recognizing. A man who didn't take souvenirs, didn't repeat methods, didn't taunt police, and didn't crave the spotlight. Someone who moved through the world like a ghost. He could step off a plane in a state he'd never been to, rent a car under a fake name, drive into the wilderness for hours, and take a life without leaving a fingerprint, a footprint, or even a hint that a crime had occurred at all. A man who buried murder kits years in advance, hidden beneath dirt and roots, waiting like silent promises he intended to keep. A predator who vanished his victims so completely that families were left with nothing but questions and a name they had never heard before. No bodies, no evidence, no trail to follow. Only the terrifying realization that he had been out there for years, hunting in plain sight, and no one had ever noticed. Today, we're talking about the infamous killer you may have never heard of, Israel Keyes. Israel Keyes was a traveling predator, a serial killer, serial rapist, arsonist, bank robber, and abductor whose crimes stretched across multiple states. He became infamous for the one thing most killers can't pull off, making people vanish without a trace. Let's start with his upbringing. Israel Keyes was born in January of 1978 in the rugged landscape of Utah, into a large, isolated family that moved frequently and lived far off the grid. His parents rejected mainstream society, choosing instead to raise their children in remote cabins without electricity, running water, or outside influence. Their world revolved around strict religious extremism, a fringe interpretation that kept the family separate from schools, medical care, and almost all outside contact. This isolation shaped Keyes in ways no one around him fully understood. He grew up without the social norms most children learn naturally. He wasn't surrounded by peers, he wasn't supervised by teachers, and he wasn't exposed to anything resembling a typical childhood. Even at a young age, he displayed disturbing behavior. Neighbors and siblings later described early signs of violence, including harming animals and showing no sense of guilt when confronted. He learned quickly that silence protected him. He also learned that out in the wilderness, far from prying eyes, he could experiment with cruelty without consequences. By the time he reached his teenage years, he had already committed acts most adults couldn't imagine, including attacks on animals that mirrored predatory behavior, rehearsing control and dominance long before he ever targeted human beings. During this period, his grandfather gave him a .38 caliber revolver, a gift most teenagers would never receive, and Keyes immediately took it further by outfitting it with his first homemade silencer. It was a small window into his developing mindset. He wasn't just learning how to use weapons. He was learning how to modify them, hide them, and operate without being detected. Around the same time, he and a friend developed a habit of breaking into houses deep in the woods, burglarizing cabins and isolated homes for the thrill of it. These break-ins weren't about stealing valuables. They were about practicing control, invading private spaces, and testing how far he could push himself without getting caught. Each step escalated him closer to the person he would eventually become. As the family moved to Washington State and lived deep in the forests near the Canadian border, Keyes developed skills that would eventually make him an exceptionally dangerous predator. He learned to hunt with precision. He learned to track animals through snow and dense brush. He learned to move quietly enough that even seasoned outdoorsmen wouldn't hear him approaching. He became completely at home in the wilderness, studying the natural world in a way that went far beyond survival skills. The woods became his sanctuary and his training ground. These abilities would later give him an advantage no one understood until it was already too late, allowing him to carry out crimes with a level of stealth and planning unlike anything investigators had encountered. But even before he ever wore a uniform or left home, he crossed a line that revealed who he was becoming. Sometime between 1996 and 1998, Keyes committed what is believed to be his first major violent crime. He abducted a teenage girl from a hiking group along the Deschutes River near Maupin, Oregon, taking her into the woods and raping her before eventually releasing her. It was a crime, carried out with calculated confidence, showing that he already trusted his ability to isolate a victim, control a situation, and escape without leaving evidence. For investigators looking back, it marked the moment when his private fantasies turned into real-world violence, long before anyone knew his name or how far he was capable of going. In the late 1990s, he joined the United States Army, one of the few environments structured enough to mask the chaos inside him. To everyone around him, he came across as disciplined, polite, and surprisingly normal. Fellow soldiers later described him as quiet but friendly, someone who drank with the group, joked around, and never raised suspicion. He trained as a soldier, learning not just marksmanship and physical endurance, but the kind of organization and logistical thinking that would later shape his crimes. The military taught him how to plan, how to prepare, and how to stay calm under pressure. It also gave him opportunities to travel across the country, studying new places and absorbing details in a way most people never notice. During his service, he received a DUI charge in Thurston County, Washington, followed by a state charge for driving with a suspended license. Later that same year, he was honorably discharged from the Army. According to his later confessions, Keyes used that window of freedom to murder his first human victims, an unidentified couple whose bodies have never been found. It was one of the earliest examples of him slipping into crime between major life transitions, moving through the world unnoticed while leaving devastation behind him. After leaving the military in 2000, he blended back into civilian life with an ease that would later disturb investigators. He found work in construction, a job that kept him physically active and constantly on the move. He built a reputation as a reliable worker. He started a family. He bought a house. He played the role of a normal American man so convincingly that no one could have guessed what was happening beneath the surface. Because while he lived this quiet, suburban life on the outside, he was developing something inside him that he referred to as his code, a set of rules meant to separate him from every other serial killer in modern history. He wanted to kill, but he wanted to do it with absolute control. No patterns, no specific victim type, no repetitive methods, no locations that could ever be connected. He refused to leave anything that investigators could map or predict. Every detail had to be intentional. Every movement had to be planned. He wanted to create crimes that seemed like random disappearances, events with no traceable beginning and no understandable end. And for years, that's exactly what he did. And that's where his crimes stood out from almost any other serial killer in modern history. Israel Keyes wanted people to disappear, not to be found, not to be identified, not to spark news headlines that would trace back to him. He buried kill kits across the United States, filled with cash, weapons, duct tape, and tools. Some he had placed years prior to ever using them. He would choose a random airport, board a plane, rent a car, drive hundreds of miles, and pick victims based only on opportunity. No one who knew him had any idea. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't sloppy. He was deliberate. By the mid-2000s, Israel Keyes had become a traveling predator, and around 2006, he he allegedly claimed 2 more victims. It was during this period that he began making numerous trips across the country, though the purpose of many of these journeys remains unknown. By 2009, after traveling to California, Washington, and New England, he decided to rob a bank to fund his crimes. On April 10th, following the abduction and murder of an unidentified man, Keyes walked into the community bank in Tupper Lake, New York. He wore sunglasses, a jacket, jeans, gray sneakers, 2 tone gloves, and a fake mustache and goatee. He was armed with a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson semi-automatic pistol, as well as a .22 caliber Ruger Charger pistol. The robbery was swift and successful, and he fled the scene, later burying a toolbox about half a mile down a path in the Woodside Natural Area in Essex, Vermont. Inside the toolbox were both firearms and desiccant, preserved for future use. 4 days later, Keyes returned home by airplane. Over the next 2 years, he continued to travel extensively, always under the radar. Between April and May of 2011, he constructed a homemade silencer for the Ruger Charger. Soon after, he tested it during a meticulously planned crime. After flying to Indiana and driving to New York to attach the silencer, he traveled to Vermont to recover the toolbox he had buried years earlier. He then selected a random target for murder, preparing for what would become a violent, calculated attack. On July 8th, late at night, Keyes surveilled suburban neighborhoods from the woods. He initially considered a motorist, but ultimately turned his focus to a couple, Bill and Lorraine Currier, living at 8 Colbert Street in Essex, less than half a mile from the hotel where he was staying. He disabled the phone line, broke into the house, and ambushed the couple as they slept. In a rapid, violent assault, he subdued and tied them up, then took Lorraine's .38 Smith & Wesson revolver along with other items. He abducted the couple and transported them to an abandoned farmhouse. Attempts to use their cell phones failed, leaving Keyes frustrated. In a fit of rage when his control faltered, he shot Bill with the silenced Ruger Charger. He then sexually assaulted and ultimately strangled Lorraine, placing both bodies in the farmhouse basement. He planned to return later to burn the house down, but his plans were interrupted when the courier's car broke down. He abandoned it the next day in a parking lot. On his way back to Anchorage, he destroyed stolen items in a fire in New Hampshire and left other tools and the courier's revolver behind in New York. Unbeknownst to him, the farmhouse was demolished in late October, and debris containing the bodies was transported to a local landfill. Around this time, he purchased a police scanner, presumably to monitor law enforcement activity. Authorities struggled for years to make sense of the disappearances. Keyes admitted to multiple murders, but investigators believe the true number may be far higher. Unlike other killers, he went out of his way to erase all traces of his crimes. He chose remote areas, left no evidence, and in some cases, left no bodies at all. Families were left with nothing to work with, no clues, no answers, just unexplained disappearances. In 2012, Keyes committed the infamous crime that would ultimately lead to his downfall. After driving around aimlessly around Anchorage in search of an innocent victim, he set his sights on 18-year-old barista Samantha Koenig at her coffee kiosk. Holding her at gunpoint, he demanded the money from the register and tied her up, initially planning to abduct her boyfriend, Dwayne Tortolani, as well. He ultimately focused on Koenig, forcing her into his truck and keeping her captive in his home. The next day, he made a critical mistake. He stole Koenig's debit card, which she shared with Tortolani, and used it across several states before departing on a cruise. This left a digital trail that the FBI and local authorities could finally follow, a thread that would unravel the carefully constructed web of anonymity he had maintained for years. Unlike his previous victims, Koenig's disappearance left a trace, and for the first time, investigators had a real lead on Israel Keyes. Upon returning from his cruise, Keyes became increasingly worried about the attention surrounding Samantha Koenig's disappearance. What followed was a reckless stretch of crimes that would finally leave a trail investigators could follow. In mid-February of 2012, while traveling through Texas, he set fire to a house and a barn in Aledo, likely to distract law enforcement from his movements. On February 16th, he carried out a daring bank robbery at the National Bank of Texas in Azle. Wearing a hard hat, sunglasses, gloves, and a breathing mask, he entered and left the bank in under 2 minutes with cash in hand. Later, he buried the stolen money near Glen Rose, Texas, in a rural area he thought would go unnoticed. During the same trip, he attempted to abduct a woman walking her dog but quickly abandoned the attempt, a rare slip in his otherwise meticulous planning. These crimes, while bold, left clues he could not fully erase. Investigators began piecing together his movements in Texas, and combined with the digital trail from Samantha Koenig's debit card withdrawals across multiple states, a pattern was emerging. Authorities now had timestamps, locations, and financial transactions they could track, threads that Keyes had never left before. Returning to Anchorage, Keyes continued his activities. But the FBI and local police were closing in. Every move he made after Koenig's abduction, every misstep in Texas, and the growing public attention on her disappearance were creating a net around him. What had once been a perfect system of disappearing without a trace was beginning to unravel. This series of increasingly bold crimes, the fires, the bank robbery, the attempted abduction, and the use of Koenig's debit card, directly contributed to the investigation that would finally bring Israel Keyes out of the shadows and into custody. It was the beginning of the end for one of America's most elusive and methodical serial killers. While in Alaska, he enacted a ransom plan for Koenig, whose death authorities did not yet know about. He sent a note to Tortolani, then dismembered Koenig's body with a chainsaw, disposing of the remains in Matanuska Lake. Keyes' crimes illustrate a level of planning, mobility, and ruthlessness almost impossible to comprehend. He did not kill for fame or recognition. He did not leave trophies. He killed with cold precision, carefully erasing every trace of his existence, making people disappear completely, leaving families in a state of endless uncertainty. It was this obsession with disappearing without a trace that defined Israel Keyes, setting him apart from nearly every other serial killer in modern history. The FBI, local police, and multiple jurisdictions worked together, tracking ATM withdrawals that led them straight to him in March of 2012. When they arrested him in Texas, they expected to be closing a single kidnapping case. What they uncovered instead was the outline of a killer, unlike any they had ever interrogated. Israel Keyes began talking, but only on his terms. He confessed to murders in Vermont, Washington, and New York, though he refused to give names or details that could bring families closure. He admitted to traveling cross-country just to kill. He admitted to burying murder tools across the country, and he admitted that his goal was to have no pattern at all. The more they learned about him, the more unsettling the picture became. Investigators realized he had been operating for more than a decade. They learned that he intentionally separated his crimes from his home, his family, his work, and his day-to-day life. He said he admired other killers only for their ability to avoid detection, not for their brutality. For him, secrecy was the point. His greatest pride was that he could make people disappear without leaving any trace at all. When investigators finally caught up to him and dragged him back to Anchorage in late March, Keyes didn't panic, didn't cry, and didn't deny anything. Instead, he sat calmly in an interrogation room and admitted to killing Samantha Koenig. Her body would be recovered from the icy waters of Matanuska Lake on April 1st. From the beginning, Keyes treated every interview like a negotiation. He was polite, patient, and disturbingly composed, but constantly irritated by courtroom procedures, legal red tape, and the rules he was expected to follow. He didn't want a trial. He didn't want a jury. He didn't even want a defense. What he wanted was simple. He would confess to everything he'd done, plead guilty to every charge, and tell investigators about other victims, but only if he was guaranteed an execution within a year. It was the ultimate attempt to maintain control, even when he was already in chains. The FBI understood that prying information out of him meant playing along. They brokered an unusual deal. Keyes would talk about earlier murders, including where bodies might be found, and in return the media wouldn't be fed details he didn't want released. That cooperation led investigators to the ruins of the abandoned farmhouse in Vermont where he had left Bill and Lorraine Currier. The home had been demolished months earlier. All that remained were faint signs of human decomposition, the last traces of lives he'd erased. But the moment Keyes sensed he was losing control of the narrative, he threatened to shut down the interviews entirely. He didn't want his name in headlines. He didn't want the public connecting dots he hadn't personally drawn. In June, during what should have been a simple hearing, Keyes suddenly bolted from his seat, slipping restraints and lunging towards spectators. Whether it was a genuine escape attempt or a desperate move towards suicide, no one knows. He was subdued by a taser, dragged out, and secured under much stricter conditions. From then on, he was escorted by multiple officers, kept in full restraints, and subjected to daily cell inspections. Even razors and pencils were tightly controlled. The next day, he told investigators he wasn't trying to flee at all, claiming he simply snapped. But no one believed him. In July, when a local news station broke the story linking him to the Currier murders, Keyes shut down completely. He refused to speak to investigators for nearly 2 months, furious that the agreement he had relied on had crumbled. For a man obsessed with control, losing ownership of his own story was a punishment worse than prison. Then, on December 2nd, 2012, Israel Keyes ended his own life inside his Anchorage jail cell. In a bizarre and violent act, he slashed his wrists with a razor that should never have been issued to him and also attempted to hang himself. The combination was so unusual that the medical examiner couldn't determine which method actually killed him. On the cell floor, officers found a 2-page suicide note filled with rambling metaphors and no useful information. No names, no locations, no answers. And that is where Israel Keyes intended the story to stop. But the investigation didn't end with him. In August of 2013, federal authorities released new details suggesting he may have killed at least 11 people between 2001 and 2012, with possible victims in Canada and other countries he traveled through. They also revealed his involvement in 20 to 30 burglaries and multiple bank robberies that he never admitted to. To this day, the true number of victims remains unknown. Investigators believe the iceberg is much larger than what Keyes ever revealed. Some of his kill kits have never been found. Some of his travels remain unexplained. Some families are still waiting for answers that may never come. And that is the final wound he left behind. Because Israel Keyes didn't just kill people. He erased them. He shaped his entire identity around silence and shadows. And even in death, he held on to his last secret. He made sure no one would ever know the full truth. I'm anonymous, and this is Conspiracy Anonymous. If you want more deep dive stories like this, hit like, subscribe, and tell me which dark mystery you want me to break down next.